Bonjour, Français 4, reprise du futur simple. So we are going to take time now to go over the various conjugations of the futur simple. This is review. We did this a couple of years ago. So let's just take a look and refresh our memories. Remember that the futur simple is the future tense in French, and the futur simple is used to describe what will happen. So there are two ways to describe the future, right? One is to use two verb sentences, which you've been doing for several years now. That is to use the construction of aller plus the infinitive to say something is going to happen. So aller plus the infinitive is the going to. And so that is a little bit different, all right? Using a two-verb sentence like aller plus the infinitive means going to. You can also use vouloir plus the infinitive, wants to. You can do pouvoir plus the infinitive, something can happen. Devoir plus the infinitive, something must happen. All of those are just constructions, two verbs. Conjugate the first verb, leave the second in the infinitive. If you use aller as your first verb, it clearly indicates the future because it means going to. This is different than the futur simple conjugation, okay? Because when you conjugate a verb, what you're doing is you're taking the infinitive, the root word, and you are changing it. And that is the difference. The wording difference is the difference between going to, which is what you have with aller plus the infinitive, and will, which is what you have with the futur simple. So it's just a wording difference. It's not a meaning difference. However, the use of the futur simple shows that you have a greater understanding of how French works, as opposed to using aller plus the infinitive, which is simply a two-verb construction. So to form the futur simple, remember that you start with either the infinitive or the irregular stem, and then you add the endings. The big thing with the futur simple is that you are starting with the infinitive or the stem. For the present tense and for other tenses that we have done, the passé composé, the imparfait, you're going to change that infinitive somehow before you add your endings. With the futur, you do not, with a few exceptions that I will talk about in a moment. One of the main changes that you need to be aware of is that if the verb ends in RE, whether that verb is regular in the present tense or not, you're going to take the E off before you add your endings in the futur simple. For example, rendre is a regular RE verb, and you're going to take the E off before you add your endings. Lire is an irregular verb in the present tense, but you are going to take off the E before you add your endings. Another change that is made in the futur simple is that verbs that have certain changes in the present tense, you add that change onto the infinitive for the futur simple. So for example, if you have a stem changing verb where you add an accent grave, for example with acheter, then you are going to put that addition of the accent onto the infinitive. So remember that the je form of acheter is j'achète, and we put that accent on there to force that second syllable. So now we're going to add that accent to the infinitive. So you end up with acheter instead of acheter, where we kind of, here it's actually, the original form is acheter, but it gets swallowed, so everybody just says acheter instead of acheter. With the future, when you put the accent on it, now you're actually going to pronounce that eh. So you're going to say acheter instead of acheter, acheter. For verbs that are YER verbs, for example, nettoyer, Remember that YER verbs have the Y changing to I. So, for example, it is je nettoie, right, with the I. So you are going to put that I in there. And the reason for that is actually to make that sound a little bit more fluent, not such a harsh two syllables. So nettoyer is the verb, but when we put it, when we spell it with an I before we add our ending, you end up pronouncing it more like nettoyer, so that you're not like ing. All right, that I is there to kind of do the nettoyer, but you're not making that harsh sound like you do with the Y. Also, we have some verbs that double the consonant, and it could be, it's not only L that does that. There are some verbs that with T that do that as well, that the T changes to a double T. For example, appeler. So appeler, remember, means to call. So if I want to say that I call someone, I double the L there. I say j'appelle. So you do the double L in the future, appellerai. And again, that's because you have an additional syllable. So the reason for all of these changes is because we're adding a syllable on the end here, and we want to make sure that it sounds like the future instead of sounding like something else. Then we have the ones that are just irregular. And unfortunately, we just have to learn these. And again, this is review, so you should know a lot of these already. Aller is ir. Asseoir is assier or asseoir without the E. Okay, and it really doesn't matter. I tend to do it this way because that's the way I learned. Also, because personally, I think it's easier to remember something completely different than to remember that I should take the E out for that second form. But again, it does not matter. Both forms are equally used. Avoir is or, courir is cour with two R's, and devoir is devre. So I will say it is very unusual, with the exception of this one. I don't know why Asseoir still does this, but if you have a verb that ends in OIR, the future stem is almost always irregular. It's very unusual to have an OIR stem in the futur simple. Another thing that is interesting for those of us who are multilingual is that ir is the verb for to go in Spanish. It's the infinitive of the verb to go in Spanish. So what I find so fascinating with Romance languages is that there are connections between them, because remember, Romance doesn't mean lovey-dovey. It means Roman, from the Romans, which is where all of our Romance languages came from, including French and Spanish. And often the connections might not be obvious at the beginning. So the infinitives for to go, in French it's aller, and in Spanish it's ir, and they don't look anything at all like each other. When you start looking at the present tense conjugations, some of the forms look like each other. And when you get to this point, the future stem in French looks like the Spanish infinitive. So I just find it fascinating to see a lot of these connections. Continuing, envoyer is envers. This one is one of the ones that to me is the absolute hardest to remember, because envoyer in every other tense is a YER verb. Change the Y to I, but otherwise it's a regular ER verb. It's no big deal. But for some funky reason, the futur simple is irregular. I don't know. I don't know why. Être is ser. And again, this is a French-Spanish connection. The verb in Spanish, the infinitive for to be, one of the verbs for to be in Spanish is ser. So again, a connection that is made kind of once you look into the depths of the conjugations and not at first glance. Faire is faire, F-E-R. Falloir is faudre. Remember that falloir is the infinitive for il faut. So all of those subjunctive sentences that we did with il faut que, this is falloir. So faudre is the irregular stem, but really you only need to know the il form, il faudra, the il singulier, because that's the only form that's ever used of il faut. Mourir is mour, 2 R's. Pleuvoir is pleuvre. Remember that pleuvoir is to rain, all right? So this is the infinitive for il pleut. I know that is really weird, and so you do need to remember it. So again, it's another one where you're only going to need to know il pleuvra, the il singular form. Pouvoir, pour, recevoir, recevre, savoir, saur, tenir, tiendre. So tenir, if you don't know what that means, that is to hold, like to hold on to something, tenir. Valoir is vaudre. Valoir means to be worth, okay? The most common way it's used is valoir. There's an expression, valoir la peine, which means to be worth, to be worth the effort. That's E-I-N-E. Valoir la peine, to be worth the effort. Venir, viendre. Again, remember that venir and tenir are sister verbs, so their conjugations are similar in all of the tenses. Then we have voir is ver, vouloir is voudre, and those are the last of the irregulars. The exciting part about the futur simple is that there is only one set of endings. So every single verb, if you want to say that something will happen, every single verb has these endings. A, on, et, on. So if you notice, it is almost like the present tense of avoir. So the je, tu, il, elle, on, and il, elle plural forms, those are the present tense of avoir. Nous and vous, it's just the ONS easy. So let's do some examples, all right? I will see is je verrai. So again, when you have will, you're just going to take the verb see. Here it is, voir is ver, and then I add my je ending, je verrai. One of the most difficult things with the futur simple is remembering that it's only one word in French. In English, we use a helping verb. We put will in front of anything, and then we know it is in the future. But in the futur simple in French, it's only one word. You will have fun, so we're going to take the verb for to have fun. Now, the verb for to have fun is s'amuser. And remember, whenever you have that S apostrophe, you have to do something with it, which means you have to make it match your subject. So that's why I have the to there. And then it's amuser, and I put the ending on. There's amuser. There's my tu ending. Tu t'amuseras. We will read. Nous lirons. Will tells me to do it in the future tense. Read is my action. I have lire. It's an RE verb, so I take the E off first, and then I add the new ending. The girls will be tired, okay? Will be, will tells me do it in the futur simple. Be is être. So I have ser, which is irregular for être. Les filles, and then fatigué the same way I would in any tense. It's an adjective, so it is not affected by my verb conjugation, only by whoever it is I am describing. So the girls will be tired. Les filles seront fatiguées. You do have some practice online if you would like to practice with the futur simple.